On the afternoon of October 1st, 2013, a young man in a t-shirt walks into a public library in San Francisco. He finds a seat in the science fiction section near the window and opens his laptop. Nothing about him stands out. Messy hair, a few days of stubble. He looks like a grad student who needs a coffee. But on the screen in front of him, hidden behind layers of encryption most people don't even know exist, he is logged into the most wanted website on the planet. He is its god, its judge, its only true administrator. And about 15 feet away, a woman suddenly screams at a man, "Get a job!" And the two of them start shoving each other, loud and ugly, right there between the bookshelves. The young man turns to look. Of course he turns. Everyone turns. It is the last free decision he will ever make, because the fight isn't real. The screaming couple are federal agents. And in the half-second his eyes leave the screen, a third agent slides in, grabs the laptop off the table and runs. They needed it open. They needed it unlocked, because the moment that lid closed, everything on it would vanish behind encryption no court order could ever crack.
So who is he?
And how does a quiet kid in a public library end up at the center of a manhunt that pulled in the FBI, the DEA, the IRS, and the Secret Service, all at once? Let's investigate that. To understand how strange this moment is, you have to understand what the agents had been chasing. For almost 3 years, somewhere in the hidden corners of the internet, a man had been running a business. The business sold heroin, cocaine, LSD, meth, fake passports, and even hacking tools. Almost anything illegal you can imagine shipped to your door in the mail like a pair of shoes. By the time it was shut down, it had handled more than 1.5 million transactions. Over $1 billion flowed through it. And the man at the top had a name out of a fairy tale. He called himself the Dread Pirate Roberts. Nobody knew his face, nobody knew his country. Investigators on 3 continents weren't even sure he was one person. He was, by every measure the police had, a ghost. This is the story of how that ghost was built, and the small, almost stupid mistake that turned him back into a man. So let's start with the obvious question. How do you sell drugs to the entire world in plain sight and not get caught? The answer was 2 pieces of technology bolted together for the first time. The first was Tor. Think of the normal internet like sending a postcard. Your message has your address written right on it, and every post office it passes can read where it came from and where it's going. Tor wraps that postcard in layer after layer of encryption, then bounces it through a chain of random computers all over the world. Each computer can only peel off one layer. None of them can see the whole path. By the time your request arrives, nobody can trace it back to you. Your address is gone. That solved the problem of hiding, but it didn't solve the problem of paying. Because the second you connect a credit card or a bank transfer, you've signed your real name to a crime. That's where the second piece came in. Bitcoin, digital money. No bank in the middle, no name attached. Just a long string of numbers passing value from one anonymous wallet to another. Put those 2 things together, anonymous browsing, anonymous money, and you get something brand new in human history. A marketplace where the buyer, the seller, and the boss can all do business every single day and never know a single true thing about each other. The man who first stitched those 2 ideas into a working drug empire was not a cartel boss. He wasn't a hacker collective. He wasn't the mob. He was a 26-year-old who believed he was making the world a better place. His name was Ross Ulbricht. By every account, Ross was the last person you'd cast as a drug kingpin. He grew up in Austin, Texas. Eagle Scout, straight arrow. He studied physics, earned a master's in materials science, and friends remembered him as gentle, curious, a little idealistic. But somewhere along the way, Ross fell in love with an idea. He became a hardcore libertarian. He came to believe deep in his bones that the government had no right to tell a free adult what they could put in their own body. that every law against it was just violence dressed up in a suit. Most people who think that write angry posts about it. Ross decided to build the alternative. He didn't want to be a drug dealer. In his own mind, he wasn't one. He was building a free market, a place where the state couldn't reach, where transactions happened by choice and nobody got hurt. He even named it after a fantasy of peaceful trade. The Silk Road, the ancient route where goods moved freely between empires. In early 2011, Ross sat in a cabin, grew his own psychedelic mushrooms to have a first product to sell, taught himself to code the website, and launched it. And then, to protect himself, he gave the boss of this new world a costume. He took the name from The Princess Bride. In the film, the Dread Pirate Roberts isn't one man at all. It's a title, passed from person to person, so the legend never dies, and the real man can never be caught. Ross understood exactly what he was choosing, a name designed to make the person behind it impossible to find. It almost worked, because Silk Road exploded. At first, it spread through whispers. Then, in June 2011, a news site called Gawker published an article titled, "The Underground Website Where You Can Buy Any Drug Imaginable." Overnight, traffic detonated. So did the attention. A U.S. senator stood up and demanded the federal government shut this brazen market down immediately. They couldn't. That was the whole point. There was no company to subpoena, no server they could find, no name on any door. And the users? They loved it. A drug market that was safe. No dealer in a dark alley. No gun, no risk of getting robbed at the handoff. Just star ratings like Amazon. And a discreet package in your mailbox a few days later. Sellers loved it too. They built brands. They competed on purity and shipping speed. The site had escrow to stop scams, a forum for complaints, even customer service. Within 2 years, Silk Road was moving over $1 billion in goods. Dread Pirate Roberts took a commission on every sale, and the money, paid in Bitcoin he was quietly holding as the price climbed, was making him staggeringly rich. He was profiled in magazines as a folk hero, a digital Robin Hood. Senators demanded the site be shut down and couldn't touch it. But running an empire is lonely when you can't tell a soul. So Dread Pirate Roberts found a confidant, a sharp, ruthless mentor who went by the name Variety Jones. Jones helped him tighten security, think bigger, and run the site like a real boss instead of an idealist with a website. He even nudged Ross to think of himself as the leader of a movement. And meanwhile, Ross was living a double life that should have been impossible to hold together. By day, to his roommates, he was just Josh, a quiet guy who paid his rent in cash and didn't talk much about work. By night, behind the encryption, he was the Dread Pirate Roberts, signing off on million-dollar decisions and keeping a private journal where he confessed how heavy the secret had become. He wrote about wanting to be there for the people he loved, while building an empire he could never tell a single one of them about. He was, in his own words, lonely at the top of a kingdom that didn't officially exist. And slowly, the gentle physics student started to disappear. The kid who built a market so nobody would get hurt began writing in his private journal and his chat logs, like a man who had something to protect at any cost. He was about to prove just how far he'd go. Here is where the story turns dark. In early 2013, one of Silk Road's own employees was arrested. A man named Curtis Green, who worked customer support, had been busted by investigators, and Dread Pirate Roberts panicked. He became convinced Green had stolen money and would talk to the police. And so the man who built his empire on the promise that nobody gets hurt made a decision. He ordered Curtis Green killed. He reached out to a contact he trusted, a big-time dealer on the site who went by Knob, and asked him to do it. He agreed on a price, $40,000. He even wrote that he was a little disturbed by how calm he felt about ordering a man's death. A while later, the photos came back. Curtis Green on the floor covered in what looked like vomit, apparently tortured and dead. Dread Pirate Roberts paid in full, but Curtis Green was not dead. The whole thing was fake. The torture was Campbell's Chicken and Stars soup. The photos were staged by federal agents. And here's the part that sounds invented. The dealer Knob, the man Dread Pirate Roberts hired as his assassin, was actually Carl Force, a DEA agent working the case. But this rabbit hole goes deeper than anyone planned, because 2 of the federal agents investigating Silk Road weren't just investigating it. They were robbing it. Carl Force, The DEA agent was secretly selling Dread Pirate Roberts information on the side and pocketing the Bitcoin, and a Secret Service agent named Sean Bridges used stolen admin access to drain around 20,000 Bitcoin straight out of the site into his own wallet. The hunters were corrupt. The murder was staged, and the kingpin had just paid $40,000 to kill a man who was sitting in a hotel room eating room service. It's almost funny. Almost. Except Ross didn't stop there. Court documents say he commissioned several more murders to protect his empire. As far as anyone can prove, none of them actually happened. But that no longer mattered to the people now hunting him, because by the time the soup photos were taken, the net was already closing, and it had started with something so small Ross had forgotten it existed. Meet the people chasing the ghost. One of them was Jared Der Yegiayan, a Homeland Security agent in Chicago, who'd stumbled onto Silk Road through a steady drip of drug packages intercepted at O'Hare Airport. He pulled the thread, went undercover, and eventually did something remarkable. He arrested one of the site's own moderators and quietly took over that moderator's account. Now, think about what that means. Der Yegiayan was, in effect, working for the Dread Pirate Roberts. He was a paid staff member of the very empire he was trying to destroy. He chatted with the boss directly, took orders from him, got to know how he typed, how he thought when he was online. He was inside the castle. But he still had no idea whose face was on the other end of the screen. He was so deep in that on the day of the arrest, he wasn't even certain the police had the right man, until he saw the proof with his own eyes. But the real breakthrough didn't come from a daring undercover sting. It came from a man at a desk who simply refused to believe the boss was as smart as everyone said. His name was Gary Alford, an IRS investigator, and Alford had a theory that felt almost insulting in its simplicity. If Silk Road was famous now, someone had to have talked about it back when it was brand new, and nobody was watching. So he did the thing none of the cyber experts had bothered to do. He went to Google, and he searched for the earliest mentions of Silk Road anywhere on the internet. And there it was, buried in an old forum, dated just days after the site first appeared, a post from a user called Altoid, hyping up this exciting new marketplace. The same username, Altoid, turned up again on a Bitcoin forum. But this time, the poster was asking for help building a Bitcoin startup, and he told interested people to email him. The email address was right there in the post, Ulbricht@gmail.com. The most wanted man on the internet, the ghost, the pirate, the man who ran a billion-dollar empire on the principle that no one could ever know who you really are, had advertised his own site using his own full legal name, and then left it sitting on a public forum for 2 years. The disguise was perfect. The man wearing it had signed his real name to it before he even put it on. After that, the case stopped being a mystery and started being a countdown. The agents pulled at the thread. Somewhere out there was the actual server running Silk Road, the physical machine. And for 2 years nobody could find it because Tor was supposed to make that impossible. Then it slipped. Investigators say a misconfiguration in the site's login page caused the server to briefly leak its real internet address, the digital equivalent of a witness-protected man accidentally mailing a letter with his home address on the back. The trail led to a data center in Iceland. Quietly, agents got a copy of that server's entire contents, and it was a confession in code. Every chat, every order, a private ledger of millions of dollars. And the administrator's account carried a quiet, almost intimate signature. The user was named Frosty, and the master encryption key was labeled Frosty at Frosty, the same handle that traced straight back to Rossi's own computers. They found old posts where Frosty asked coding questions on a programmer's forum under, yes, his real name again, before hastily editing it. Every alias, every account, every careful wall Ross had built, they all leaked the same name through the cracks. By the autumn of 2013, the FBI knew 3 things. They knew the Dread Pirate Roberts was Ross Ulbricht. They knew he was living quietly in San Francisco under a fake ID. And they knew the single hardest part of the entire arrest had nothing to do with finding him. It was the laptop. Because Ross, like any careful operator, kept his machine encrypted. If they kicked down his door, he'd slam the lid in a heartbeat and the encryption would lock. Every chat log, every order, every transfer, every piece of evidence that proved this gentle-looking kid was the kingpin, gone behind a wall of math. They didn't just need to catch him. They needed to catch him with the lid open and his hands away from the keyboard. So they followed him. They learned his routine. They watched him carry his laptop to a coffee shop near his apartment, and when it was full, to the public library down the street. And they began to plan a piece of theater. Which brings us back to the afternoon of October 1st, 2013. Ross Ulbricht walks into the Glen Park branch library, finds his seat by the window and opens his laptop. He's relaxed. He has no reason not to be. He's just a man checking in on his work. He types in his password, and Silk Road blooms onto the screen. The live administrator panel, the chats, the money, all of it open and unlocked. What he can't see is that the room is full of agents. The browsing student near the shelves, the couple by the table, the man pretending to read. They have exactly one window and it stays open only as long as that laptop does, so they make their move. The woman screams, "Get a job!" She and her partner explode into a fight, shoving, shouting, knocking into the furniture, a sudden burst of chaos in a silent library. And Ross, being human, turns to look. In that instant, an agent crosses the room, reaches over his shoulder, and lifts the laptop clean off the table. Another set of hands pins Ross before he can lunge for it. This is the part they had drilled. A female agent takes the laptop and cradles it flat and open, like carrying a tray of water she can't spill, keeping the screen alive. If it sleeps, they lose. A technician steps in and slides a small device into the side, copying the contents to a drive so that even if the battery dies, the evidence survives. Ross is on the ground now, handcuffed, watching strangers carry away the only thing that proves who he really is. And there is nothing he can do about it. The password is in his head. It will never matter again. The lid stayed open. And there, frozen on the screen for the agents to photograph, is the proof of 3 years and $1 billion. Ross Ulbricht, logged in as the administrator, live, in the middle of running the Silk Road. The Dread Pirate. Roberts, the title that was supposed to be impossible to pin on any one man, had just been pinned to exactly one man in a public library, holding the door open himself. The hunt was over. It had taken 3 agencies, an undercover operation, a staged murder, and a fake fistfight between the bookshelves. But in the end, the ghost was caught by a Google search and an open laptop. In 2015, Ross Ulbricht was convicted on 7 counts, including drug trafficking and money laundering. The murder-for-hire charges were never even brought to trial, but the judge made it clear she'd considered them. She sentenced him to 2 life terms, plus 40 years. No possibility of parole. For a non-violent first offense, it was a stunning punishment, and it turned Ross into something he'd never managed to be while he was free, a symbol. To his supporters, he wasn't a kingpin. He was a kid who got a death sentence for building a website, a political prisoner of the drug war. They campaigned for years. They built a movement. Free Ross. And then, in January 2025, on his second full day back in office, President Donald Trump signed a full pardon. After more than 11 years behind bars, Ross Ulbricht walked out a free man. He posted that he was in shock and thanked the president and the supporters who never gave up. So what do you do with a story like this? A gentle idealist who wanted to prove people could be free and ended up ordering murders to protect his freedom, a perfect disguise, undone by a name left lying in the open. A manhunt brought down by the most ordinary tool on earth, a search bar. Ross Ulbricht believed he had built something the government could never touch. He was almost right. The technology held. Tor held. Bitcoin held. The math was never broken. It was the man who broke. It always is, because you can encrypt your traffic and you can anonymize your money and you can name yourself after a pirate who can never be caught. But somewhere, on some forgotten forum, on a quiet day before you became a legend, you signed your real name and the internet never forgets.